Bronchopulmonary dysplasia, or BPD, is an inflammatory lung disease caused particularly by prolonged exposure to mechanical ventilation, respiratory support and supplemental oxygen. And the incidence of BPD in extremely preterm babies is at least 50%, but is actually probably much higher than that now that we're looking after much smaller babies around the world. Hi, my name's Brett Manley. I'm a consultant neonatologist in Melbourne, Australia at the Mercy Hospital for Women and previously at the Royal Women's Hospital here in Melbourne. I'm a clinical neonatologist and work in the neonatal intensive care unit, but I'm also a professor at the University of Melbourne in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynaecology and Newborn Health, where I lead and collaborate on clinical trials to improve outcomes for preterm and sick neonates.
I'm Kate Francis. I'm a biostatistician based at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute here in Melbourne, Australia. I also hold honorary positions with the Department of Paediatrics at the University of Melbourne and the Royal Children's Hospital.
In neonatal intensive care units around the world, some of the sickest babies we look after are those extremely preterm babies born before 28 weeks of gestation or more than 3 months early. And as time goes by, we're looking after smaller and more immature infants right down to 22 weeks of gestation now in high-income countries. One of the biggest problems we face in the NICU is looking after these babies' lungs. They spend a long time on respiratory support and oxygen, and often for the tiny babies on mechanical ventilation. And that leads to inflammation in the lungs, which are already not properly developed. And this leads on to bronchopulmonary dysplasia, or BPD, which is the chronic lung disease of extreme prematurity. And this is defined at 36 weeks post-menstrual age in infants who are still receiving respiratory support or oxygen. And the incidence of BPD has been at least 50% in this group of babies, but is in fact increasing as we look after smaller infants. And there really are only a handful of effective treatments that help prevent or reduce the severity of BPD. And so preventing BPD has become one of the biggest questions in neonatology, and looking for new interventions and ways of doing that is really important. Because inflammation's key to BPD, we've been using a lot of anti-inflammatory steroids given systemically into the blood or the stomach of these babies, which have good effects on the lungs, but also some negative effects on the rest of the body, notably the brain. So we've been looking for new ways to give steroids directly into the lungs, and that's where the PLUS trial comes in. Our hope is that we can give steroid mixed with surfactant, a life-saving therapy that nearly all of these babies give, to deliver it directly into the lungs where it can have its greatest effect and hopefully minimal effects in the systemic circulation and particularly on the brain. And the background to us designing and undertaking the PLUS trial was there have been several smaller trials showing dramatic improvements in survival free of bronchopulmonary dysplasia. And we always look at those smaller trials with a little bit of scepticism because it has been so hard to shift BPD. So we needed to undertake a large clinical trial to see whether intratracheal steroids mixed with surfactant would be effective.
The PLUS trial was a multi-centred, double-blind, randomised control trial. We had 21 centres involved from 4 countries: Australia, New Zealand, Singapore and Canada. We were comparing intratracheal budesonide mixed with surfactant versus surfactant alone. We ended up recruiting 1,059 babies for the study, and all of the parents provided informed prospective consent. Our participant recruitment occurred between January 2018 and March 2023. Our primary outcome was survival free of BPD at 36 weeks post-menstrual age, noting that all the babies recruited for this study were born before 28 weeks gestational age and were recruited within 48 hours after birth. To compare the two groups, we used generalised linear models and we adjusted for the strata variables in this study, which were gestational age, prior surfactant and respiratory support which was classified as either invasive or non-invasive. Our results from the trial were that those in the budesonide mixed with surfactant group had survival free of BPD in 25.6%, compared with 22.6% in the surfactant alone group. The adjusted risk difference was 2.7%, and along with the point estimate, we also like to think about and interpret our results in terms of the confidence interval or the uncertainty, and in this study that ranged from -2% to +7%. We also looked at serious adverse events between the two groups, and again we found they were quite similar and there was no evidence of a difference in adverse events. So overall, from the PLUS trial, we concluded that in extremely preterm infants who required surfactant, that intratracheal budesonide had little to no effect on survival free of BPD.
One of the biggest challenges in doing this type of research is that it requires a huge amount of collaboration. There simply aren't enough extremely preterm babies around Australia, for example, or even around the world to undertake these trials quickly or on your own. So we reached out to all of our colleagues around Australia and New Zealand in particular to start with, where there is about 30 tertiary NICUs overall, and we were able to form this collaboration where really most of the tertiary NICUs in Australia and New Zealand helped with this trial, and we subsequently involved some good colleagues from Singapore and Edmonton in Canada who are also keen to help us as they have in previous trials. It's really hard to get all these units up and going at once, and so it was a staggered approach. We started here in Melbourne at the Royal Women's Hospital and then spread out around Australia gradually and into New Zealand, and by about the end of the second year of recruitment we had all the units up and running, which was sensational. The PLUS trial was a huge collaboration involving multiple institutions, but it was sponsored and coordinated by the Murdoch Children's Research Institute here in Melbourne, Australia. And it was funded, very thankfully, by the Australian Government, by the National Health and Medical Research Council, or NHMRC. And we also received philanthropic support from the Thrasher Foundation in the US and from Chiesi, company in Italy that manufactures the surfactant that we used in the trial. So we're very thankful to all of those people. This is a huge collaboration across 4 countries and 21 units, as Kate mentioned. And really involved over 100 investigators contributing to the trial. I just point out as well that the PLUS trial was undertaken right through the COVID pandemic, which was a big deal here in Melbourne, Australia, and other parts of Australia particularly. So we're really thrilled that we were able to achieve our sample size, and all our thoughts and thanks have to go to these incredible families that were willing to listen and consent for their infants to be part of the trial. Whilst the PLUS trial didn't show an increase in survival free of BPD like we hoped, nevertheless many units around the world had already begun using this therapy of intratracheal budesonide or corticosteroid. They'll now need to make a decision about whether to stop that. So whilst it's a negative result, it will help both stop ineffective practice or potentially unsafe practice, but also move us forward to looking at the next potential therapy and not spending more time on early budesonide. The PLUS trial began in 2018 and the last infant was recruited in early 2023, and the results were published in JAMA in November 2024. It's really important when undertaking neonatal trials enrolling premature infants to look at longer term outcomes. We're undertaking 2-year neurodevelopmental and respiratory follow-up of the infants who survived to 2 years that were enrolled in the PLUS trial, and this is almost complete. We'll be looking at over 850 assessments at 2 years as part of that. Also, it's important for us to combine data from other trials to make sure we're not missing any important effects or any subgroup effects. So we're already well and truly planning an individual patient data meta-analysis involving other trials that have previously been completed or will soon be completed. As well as the trial publication, we've had a lot of fun presenting the results to our colleagues both here in Australia and New Zealand and also around the world, including large conferences such as Hot Topics in Neonatology and Paediatric Academic Societies in the US, but also in Europe and the UK and Asia. We've also enjoyed publicising the results on social media, which I think is really important to get that out there to as many people as possible.
We were also delighted to win 2 awards at the ACTA, the Australian Clinical Trials Association Awards Day. We took out Trial of the Year for the PLUS trial, and we also took out the Statistical Excellence Award for PLUS.
ACTA has initiated the Trial of the Year Award in association with a number of other awards recognising excellence in statistics, health economics, the operation of clinical quality registries, and also the engagement with consumers. These awards are important because they're independently judged, recognising the high quality of work that's undertaken in Australia. And it's not only just by individuals, but it's so often by networks and groups of people who are working together collaboratively to really help improve outcomes for all Australians.